All right, good afternoon. The Secretary General is writing today to Florida Governor Rick Scott and to Ambassador Nikki Haley, the permanent representative of the U.S. to the United Nations, to express his profound sadness at the horrific gun massacre that took place yesterday in Parkland, Florida. It is wrenching to see so many young lives cut short in a place where students should feel safe, as well as so many families torn apart and yet another community thrown into shock, the Secretary General wrote. At this time of profound sorrow, we at the United Nations wish to say that our thoughts are with those who have been touched by this tragedy, he added. And I have a statement on the passing of Ruud Lubbers. The Secretary General is deeply saddened by the death of Ruud Lubbers, the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands and former High Commissioner for Refugees. The Secretary General expresses his heartfelt condolences to the family of Mr. Lubbers and to the people of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. The Secretary General, meanwhile, has just arrived in Munich, Germany, where tomorrow he will give a keynote speech during the opening ceremony of the Munich Security Conference. He will also have a number of bilateral meetings, and we will have an update for you tomorrow. The Deputy Secretary General, meanwhile, spoke today at a private sector roundtable in Stockholm on a meeting called Solutions Summit to End Violence Against Children. She said that companies in all sectors and all sizes have a powerful impact on children. As a starting point, she said any company serious about addressing violence against children should adopt a, quote, respect and support approach as prescribed by the Children's Rights and Business Principles. She added that companies that contribute to ending child labor in all their business activities and in all their supply chains will go a long way to rooting out the circumstances that enable violence against children to persist. Her full remarks are online. And Amina Mohammed will also met with Stefan Löfven, the Prime Minister of Sweden, among other senior officials. And while in Stockholm, she also had a chance to meet with her predecessor, Jan Eliasson. And also the Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator, Ursula Mueller, will travel to the Central African Republic, Cameroon, and Chad from the 18th to the 27th of February. As you know, the Central African Republic is on brink of relapsing into large-scale acute humanitarian crises with renewed violence forcing hundreds of thousands of people to flee their homes. In Cameroon, large-scale displacement fueled by Boko Haram crisis in the north and neighboring Central African crisis has compounded high levels of food insecurity and malnutrition. Ms. Mueller's visit will be conducted jointly with the UN Refugee Agency's Assistant High Commissioner for Operations, George Okot Obo. Finally, in Chad, hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced also due to Boko Haram-related insecurity in the Lake region and violence in Sudan and the CAR. About one-third of the population is food insecure, and 12 out of 23 regions in the country are in a nutritional emergency. In the three countries, Ms. Mueller will meet with communities impacted by the conflict, national authorities, humanitarian and development partners, as well as the diplomatic community. And the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Nikolai Mladenov, yesterday held a joint meeting with Palestinian Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah and Israel's Coordinator for Government Activities in the territory, Major General Yoav Mordecai. He said in a statement today that he was encouraged by the trilateral meeting in which all sides focused on the urgent need to finalize the reconstruction of physical damages from the 2014 Gaza conflict and on facilitating critical humanitarian solutions related to electricity, water, and health sectors. All sides agreed on the need for a joint review of the Gaza reconstruction mechanism to improve its functionality, transparency, and predictability. The United Nations also presented proposals to revitalize Gaza's economy and discuss the conditions required to ease movement and access and support Palestinian development. Our colleagues in Kabul at the UN mission in Afghanistan and the UN Human Rights Office today released the annual report documenting the impact of armed conflict on civilians in Afghanistan. According to the report, 10,453 civilians lost their lives or suffered injuries in 2017. Out of these, 3,438 were deaths, 7,015 were injuries. Although this figure represents a decrease of 9% compared to 2016, the report highlights that the number one causes of casualties were suicide bombings and other attacks using improvised explosive devices. This This is followed by clashes between government and pro-government, anti-government and pro-government forces. The report urges parties to the conflict to take all feasible precautions to protect civilians and calls on anti-government forces to stop deliberately targeting civilians and indiscriminately using improvised explosive devices. More on the mission's website. And our colleagues at UNHCR, the UN Migration Agency, and UNICEF today jointly warned that gaps in data covering refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants, as well as internally displaced populations, are endangering the lives of millions of children on the move. Their joint report, A Call for Action Protecting Children on the Move, starts with better data, says that in 2016, an estimated 28 million children were living in forced displacement, but warned that the true figure is likely to be much higher, as there are alarming holes in the availability and reliability of data, which enables understanding of how migration impacts children and their families. In the absence of reliable data, the report says the risks and vulnerabilities facing children on the move remain hidden and unaddressed. The agencies called on member states to make better data collection and analysis as a key feature of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration and the Global Compact on Migration and Refugees, which are currently being developed for adoption later this year. And the World Health Organization issued today new recommendations to establish global care standards for healthy pregnant women and reduce unnecessary medical interventions. Worldwide, an estimated 140 million births take place every year. Most of these occur without complications for women and the babies. Yet for the past 20 years, practitioners have increased the use of interventions that were previously only used to avoid risks or treat complications, such as oxytocin infusion to speed up labor and cesarean sections. The Princess Nothemba Simela, Dr. Princess Nothemba Simela, the Assistant Director of WHO, stressed that the increased medicalization of normal childbirth processes are undermining a woman's own capability to give birth and negatively impacting her birth experience. And also from WHO, the Emergency Committee unanimously agreed that the risk of international spread of polio virus remains a public health emergency of international concern. Experts stress that the potential risks of further spread through population movement, whether family, social, or cultural reasons, or in the context of population displaced by insecurity, returning refugees, or nomadic populations. International coordination continues to be needed to address these risks, particularly in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nigeria, and its Lake Chad neighbors, as well as countries bordering Syria. And yesterday, the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Guinea-Bissau, Modibo Ibrahim Touré, briefed the Council on the rapidly evolving political situation in the country, and his remarks are available in my office. And after Mr. Varma briefs, we will be joined by my colleague Mita Hosali, the Deputy Director of the News and Media Division, who will be here to help you explore the new UN News website, which is online. Ms. Lederer.
Thank you, Steph. As a follow-up to the Secretary General's statement about the mass shooting in Florida, what is the Secretary General's position on the possession of guns, rifles, and assault weapons by civilians?
Look, the program of action on small arms and light weapons, which is a politically binding framework which has been discussed since 2001, is scheduled to be reviewed this year, outlines actions for states to take at the national, regional, and global levels to combat and eradicate the illicit trade in small arms. It also agrees that states agree to undertake various measures to combat the trade, but it does not. The UN framework does not address the legal trade in small arms, which needs to be dealt with at the national level.
Same topic.
So I'll come right back to you. Yes, Sherwin.
Happy to. Steph, change of leadership in South Africa with the election of Cyril Ramaphosa today. Does the Secretary General have any reaction?
We obviously took note of the resignation of President Zuma and the election of Cyril Ramaphosa as the 5th president of South Africa. The Secretary General congratulates the people of South Africa and the ruling African National Congress Party for ensuring a smooth transition, which I think testifies to the vigorous democratic culture in the country. And we will, of course, continue to work closely with the new president on many priorities, particularly on peace and security issues in Africa.
Sure. Two follow-ups now. One is on. I heard what you said on weapons. I'd asked Farhan yesterday about this display that's still taking place down in the 1B basement, and it involves. I hadn't actually, when I asked him, seen the video shown by the Pindad Indonesian arms manufacturer, but it shows exactly the type of high-speed automatic weapons used in Parkland, Florida. And I'm just wondering, I understand that he said it's entirely up to member states. I find it hard to believe that if a member state were to show, for example, child pornography or any number, there must be some standards. And I'm wondering if anyone in the Secretariat went down and looked at the ads for tanks, rocket launchers, and high-speed AR-15 style automatic weapons.
Let me try to gather a bit more information on that.
Okay. The other one actually has to do with South Africa, but only indirectly. I just wanted to ask you. Yesterday there was a press conference by the head of UN Women, and among other questions, I asked her about an interview that she'd given in which she described her past working under Thabo Mbeki, talked about the ANC. So I don't want to say it's a softball, but I asked what are the rules applicable to an international civil servant speaking about the politics in their country? Some of the audio was lost in the thing, but she definitely said there's no playbook for this. And I wonder, isn't there a playbook? What would you say in terms of what's the Secretary General's view on how his officials should comment on the politics in their country?
Listen, I didn't hear exactly what she said. I think if she was commenting on her past, and the executive director has a very prominent past in the politics and in her country and the struggle that the country went through, I see no reason why she shouldn't be able to talk about it. I think a lot of senior officials bring with themselves historical have a historical background, and they should. Whether they talk about it or not is their own choice. Obviously, I think UN officials should, unless part of their mandate, need to be careful, I think, commenting on active political situations. But obviously, as part of their mandate, they often have a responsibility to do so. I say this as a matter of principle. I didn't hear exactly what she said.
You can easily find the interview. It wasn't said here. It was said, and it was in the midst of political turbulence in South Africa, and definitely. Right. So I guess I'm just wishing. I'm wondering, like, how should they make clear what hat they're wearing?
I think I tried to answer, and if there's an issue, I'm sure the Secretary General will take it up directly with them.
Stéphane, yesterday Mr. Mladenov briefed the Security Council regarding the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Do you have anything on that? It was, I think, a closed meeting.
No, not more than the fact that he highlighted the dire humanitarian situation, which obviously has been made more, I think, stressful with the funding crisis. UNRWA's funding crisis, which so far, as far as we understand, is not cut back any services and is striving not to. But as we know, the humanitarian crisis is also linked to issues having to do internal issues having to do with the reconciliation between various Palestinian factions, and of course, and also issues related to closures. Yeah, behind you.
I have a question about the special court in Kosovo, for Kosovo. I'm going to read in German, sorry. David Schwiedemann, the prosecutor of the special chamber, had said that he's going to retire soon. And what's your statement about the special war court for Kosovo? Why it was this necessary, and why wasn't such crimes be part of the tribunal? From the court
I
of
think I know where you're going with the question. I will be very frank with you. I'm not equipped off the top of my head to discuss this issue, but I will check, and we will get back to you with a comment. Mr. Lee.
Sure. Two peacekeeping questions. One is, there are these reports of fighting between the Congolese army and the Rwandan army in North Kivu, and I haven't seen the UN. Seems like it would, if that's taking place, it would be a pretty serious thing.
We'll check into it. I don't have anything here.
There's been a letter sent by a number of Tamil Sri Lankan groups to Mr. Lacroix about the impending, I guess, some type of a commander in UNIFIL, Mr. Huage, and they've documented to him he's supposed to deploy on Sunday. That in fact he was present during 2008 in Kilinochi, 2009 in PTK. These were highly controversial military actions. So their complaint is that in the past, Office of Human Rights of the UN would vet people, and now that doesn't appear to be the case anymore. Have you seen that letter?
DPKO has indeed received the letter you mentioned. They are looking into the case of the gentleman that you mentioned who's scheduled to be deployed to Lebanon. As a matter of policy, we're committed to ensuring that all personnel serving with the UN meet the highest standards of efficiency, competency, and integrity, including respect for and commitments to human rights. In accordance with existing policy, the UN should neither select nor deploy for service any individual who has been involved in violations of international human rights or humanitarian law. In reviewing the background of personnel to be deployed, we consider available information from within and outside of the UN system. Thus, we'll review carefully the information that has been provided to us. Member states that provide UN personnel to peacekeeping operations also have the responsibility to certify that the personnel they nominate have not been involved by act or omission in violations of international humanitarian or human rights law, or have been repatriated on disciplinary grounds from any UN operation. In cases where we have concerns regarding the human rights record of specific troop-contributing countries, we put in place additional measures to ensure that the personnel deployed is in line with the UN human rights screening policy.
Thanks for just one follow-up, because I remember Mr. Lacroix specifically commented on this when he did his press conference. It seems like these groups are saying that in the past the UN reviewed these in Geneva, and now they're relying on the Sri Lanka's own Human Rights Commission. And they say that the last four people that were deployed.
I think from what I understood of what I just said,
sure.
We review both what the government tells us and external and internal sources.
And did you ever find out if the letter from the claimant in UNAIDS was in fact received by the 38th floor?
Yes, the letter has been received by the Secretary General. Obviously, as we've said here, issues of harassment are taken seriously. The Secretary General, as you know, has taken a number of steps to ensure that there is a strengthened capacity to prevent and respond to allegations of sexual harassment and to support and protect victims. In terms of the letter, I can confirm we've received it. As you know, it's the policy of the UN as provided by the General Assembly resolutions concerning the Office of Internal Oversight Services and by staff regulations to maintain confidentiality and not to publicly discuss individual cases or complaints or investigations into misconduct. Therefore, we're not in a position to comment further on the details of the case, but as I said, the letter has been received.
And one last thing, you said this, I may have missed it, but Ms. Muller's, this trip that you mentioned Cameroon, you said that Boko Haram areas, CAR, is she not going to the south, to the Anglophone areas where there is displacement, there's been
as we get more details on the trip, I will let you know.
Okay.
Linda Fasulo.
Thank you, Steph. I have a question regarding Syria. Yesterday, we know that Stéphane de Mistura told the Security Council that the situation in Syria is at its most dangerous and worrying that it's ever been since he's been there for 4 years. I was just wondering what the Secretary General thinks about that, and if there's any chance that he may try to get involved with it in some way with someone in the near future.
Right now, our Mr. de Mistura is very much in the lead, and the Secretary General is supporting him in any way he can. You had a question.
Thank you. The UN team in Nigeria visited the north central part of the country, Benue State, earlier this week to assess the crisis caused by the herders. So I want to know, based on their assessment, is the UN in any way intervening in that crisis?
I will check what the outcome of their visit was. We'll try to get you something later today. All right, I will ask Brendan to come up, and then please stay for Mita's presentation.